Welcome to Counterpoint. I'm Tanya Granick-Allen. We're in the middle of two of my most favorite times of the year, election and back to school. Yes, as a parent, I know that back to school means back to routine, back to extracurriculars, to filling kids' minds with wonder and information. But are you as apprehensive as I am? Are you wondering just what back to school will mean for us and our children this year? Many questions are swirling through parents' minds. Will my kid require a mask? Will the COVID vaccine or other treatments be required? What about rapid testing? Will my kid be sent home if there's a positive case in her class? And what about the teachers? Will my homeschool co-op actually get to meet this year? And probably the most anxiety-inducing question of all, are we headed for another lockdown? And what if you have children in university or college? What will their school year look like? Well, various COVID protocols are being rolled out in provinces across the country, with each province coming up with its own practice. Quebec, for example, recently announced that most school children wouldn't have to wear masks or social distance, and classroom bubbles would be scrapped. This coming from the first province in the country ready to introduce a vaccine passport province-wide. Still trying to figure that one out. And then move to Ontario, where recently the Ford government announced that teachers would be mandated to get the vaccine, but not forced. If you're not disclosing your vaccine status, you'll be subject to regular testing. And then you have British Columbia, which is expected to release its back-to-school plan any day now. Recall that British Columbia never locked down its schools and only recently brought masks this past spring, and only for those grades 4 and up. So it's a very different situation over there. And perhaps the biggest controversies come from universities and colleges, where vaccine mandates have rapidly swept across the country, leaving parents and students scrambling to figure it all out in a few short weeks. So just what does the fall have in store for those returning back to school, back to homeschool? Are these measures necessary? What about privacy and other rights, which are seemingly being swept aside in order to return to normal, whatever that normal is? Well, joining me now is Peter Stock, political contributor and president of Homeschool.today, and Dr. Scott Masson, university professor and writer. Gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me today. This is a very necessary conversation, and again, one that I believe is front of mind for millions of Canadians coast to coast. So I guess we'll start with the general anxieties parents are facing. I mean, I listed so many of them in my opener. Maybe I'll start with you, Peter. What are some of the anxieties facing not just parents, but also teachers and students?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the last year is indicative of where we're going this year. Absolute uncertainty for most families. Are my kids going to be sent home for 2 weeks or 2 months or the rest of the school year? Nobody really can answer that with certainty at this point. And that interferes with all sorts of things. That interferes with parents' careers. It interferes with family plans. It interferes with, of course, academic achievement as well. How are parents going to ensure their kids get a good school year in this year? That's hard to do with the public system at present, and with, as I say, with the uncertainty that exists at the moment.
Well, you mentioned the public system. Are the private schools treated differently, Peter?
They are in some cases. In some cases, they're able to set their own rules depending on the provinces. And they tend to, because they are, of course, serving families directly and they're getting paid for it directly, they tend to be a little more accountable. They tend to be a little bit more likely to respond to the needs of families and the students that they serve. So, yeah, I think private schools have charted a different course. And in talking to somebody who runs private schools in Ontario recently, I learned that they actually saw an increase in students this past year, and they expect to grow even more. So wow. Good news for private schools.
Scott, we have 45 seconds before commercial. What are your sentiments on the anxieties as we head back to school this fall?
Well, it's everything that Peter said, obviously, but it's also the fact that the decisions are being conveyed at such short notice, and policies that really would require a great deal of, I would have thought, planning are being brought in at very short notice. So you talked about the private schools. I just heard a few minutes ago in Toronto, the private schools, so some of the most prestigious ones, so Havergal, St. Clement's, Royal St. George's, UCC, are all mandating vaccines and notifying parents right now. And we're
Wow.
talking about 10 days out from school time.
Okay,
How is
Scott,
that even possible?
we're
All
gonna
that.
we're gonna pick this up right when we come back from the commercial break. Please stick around.
Okay.
Welcome back. We're discussing back to school and what that's looking like and some of your anxieties you might be having, understandably so. Scott, just before commercial break, we were discussing some of the differences between the private school policy, public school policy, but you just mentioned that some of the, I guess, the most top tier private schools in Toronto, for example, are mandating vaccines. So it sounds like they're kind of getting in line or in line with the policy of publicly funded schools. Do you want to carry on?
Well, I don't know the rationale for it. I just know from speaking to a few people who have their children in those schools and their conversations amongst themselves that this has been conveyed to parents at very short notice. I find it extraordinary. The vaccine is first of all, it's not a vaccine. It is a genetic therapy, right? It's gene therapy, not a vaccine. And the vaccine or gene therapy, the mRNA, does not actually stop the transmission of the virus. It doesn't stop it. So even if you,
Right.
Even if the children get the shots, they're still going to get it and transmit it. It's just that it won't go into their lungs. It'll go into their noses and their throats, but they'll still pass it on. So it's not going to stop the spread, stop the cases. It does nothing of the sort. Neither will masks. Masks have been shown to be ineffective in stopping the spread and so all these measures that are still being talked about have been demonstrated by studies now, and I think there are quite a fair few of them, to be totally ineffective. So then you would ask, why on earth would they vaccinate with not only a novel vaccine but a novel technology for conveying it, and why would the private schools demand this of paying customers? I find it extraordinary, other than the degree of misinformation that's now out there. You know, on Monday that Pfizer was given approval for their vaccine.
Yes,
but
they got
it's
FDA
actually
approval.
not that vaccine. You probably wanted to talk about that, I guess.
Well, I was going to say the FDA approved Pfizer as a vaccine, and you're suggesting it's a different one?
That's what I just heard. It was I can't remember what it was called. It was given a different label, and the suggestion was, and it was from somebody who was rather eminent and trustworthy, that it was in fact not exactly the same vaccine. So the one that was approved and considered safe is not the same vaccine as currently being circulated by Pfizer. That one is being given under emergency auspices,
right,
only. Yeah.
Well, I think, you know, we obviously have jumped full throttle into the vaccine mandate debate or discussion, and rightfully so, because this has become a prominent election issue. It's definitely front of mind for parents, for teachers as they return to school, for those who are pro-vaccine mandate or those who are or against vaxports. You know, some teachers are saying, well, we don't feel comfortable in this workplace if all students and teachers are not going to be vaccinated. You mentioned it doesn't stop transmission, that's correct, the reduction of symptoms. However, we know that children under 12 are not even eligible for the vaccine. So you're going to get a mixed bag regardless. Do parents, and again, I bring this back to parents because, you know, they're the ones with the children. They're the clients of the public and private school system. Peter, are they right to be concerned about these kinds of vaccine mandates? You know, you've heard people saying, well, this is just yet another vaccine that they can tack onto their vaccine records. What's the big fuss?
Yeah, well, I think Scott's addressed some of the key concerns with these so-called shots. What I'd probably draw on is the experience that we saw just a few years ago when the state of New York in the United States decided to impose mandatory vaccination on not only all public school students, but all private school students as well. And so there was a huge exodus out of those systems. And the New York State Homeschooling Association saw 10,000 new families come and join in 1 year, sort of thing. So I would expect to see, you know, not every parent's going to be concerned about this. but enough will be that I think we'll see quite a movement out of the public system. And if what Scott's saying is sort of sticks across the country, where a lot of private schools try this as well, I think there'll be a lot of people leaving that system as well.
Well, and there have been some good measures that have come. Well, I mean, there are many good measures, but one of the really positive, I think, universally accepted measure that has come out, at least in Ontario, for example, was that they're going to be introducing these air purification, air filtering devices within the classrooms, that each classroom will be outfitted with this. And I thought, you know what, fantastic. It's sad that it took COVID to get there, because I remember being a student in public school growing up in Toronto and being told, oh, don't watch out for that portable, because they didn't have enough room in the school building, that there were portables, that one has mold or this one has this. And I was always concerned about the air quality. I was always very sensitive to dust and things like this. And so I'm glad to see that's happened. Again, too bad it's taken COVID to get there. But anyhow, we're going to pick up this discussion right when we return in a few moments. Welcome back. We're discussing back to school and what that means for you and your family and probably your children. We've relatively been discussing provincial schools and elementary schools, but let's talk about university and colleges for a moment. I haven't seen so much news fly across the news ticker than the new policies of this university and that university now implementing a vaccine mandate. And I've reached out to hear stories from parents. I said, I'm doing a show on back to school. Tell me your stories. Some parents are in support, obviously, and you have parents who are really concerned that their child's being withheld from their varsity sport, or that they're not going to be able to access a clinical placement that's required to graduate from that certificate or that degree. You're a professor, Scott. How do we make sense of this all? What do these vaccine mandates look like at university, and are they fair?
Fair to the students, fair to... Well, I would have thought the short order with which, again, the short notice that the students were given is unfair. I would have thought, since they're still in the experimental or trial phase, that requiring them, mandating them without knowing the long-term effects is unfair. I would have thought the fact that they don't stop the virus, they simply perhaps limit some of the immediate effects. So they restrict it to your nose and your throat, but they keep it out of your lungs. But they can still allow you to transmit it, which means that the cases are going to keep spiking up, and they're going to keep on spreading the terror about the vaccine, because they're not stopping it. They're not stopping it. They've never said that they would stop it.
Right.
They have never, ever, ever said that they would stop the transmission of the virus. And so I don't know why the media keeps on reporting when the cases keep rising. Of course they keep rising. Every time there's a next wave of the virus, which with each variant, they're going to keep on coming. No, I think it's dreadfully unfair. They're not at risk. Their health is not at risk from this virus, as far as I can tell. And the later variants seem to be no more lethal than the previous ones, and probably less so. And so it's extraordinary to me that what is the equivalent in terms of health risk of the flu, which we've experienced for a very long time, is now arresting people's education. I think it's dreadfully unfair on that front.
Okay, well, some people will argue, well, there is concern, clearly there have been hospitalizations and some track records of bad results, if you will, from getting the Delta variant, which apparently is higher, more easily transmittable, but less impactful. So that's, I guess, a good thing. What about parents or teachers who will even say, well, you know what, if you're not going to get with the program, the vaccine mandate, we're concerned here, then why don't you just stay home and do online learning? Why don't you be an online teacher? Is that even an option, Scott?
It is for most institutions, I believe, that it's an option there, and largely because they're hedging their bets and they're not certain, and different people have... I think it makes sense to me in some ways, because some people probably are more at risk because of their personal state of health, their age, whatever, their situation. So some allowance there, and the technology allows that. So that seems to me to be a more of a fair policy. But again, the whole the push to mandate vaccines seems to me bizarre. I mean, it's gene therapy, and it's gene therapy on people who are not at risk. Again, for all of the variants, the people that are at risk are those over 80 and in a poor state of health. They are the ones that continue to die. So why the mandates on everybody? I keep hearing herd immunity, but this is not herd immunity.
Right. Right. Exposure would be herd immunity, I suppose. Peter, you represent a homeschooling organization. What are the numbers looking like? We saw a huge surge last year before back to school last fall. Now, what about this fall? Are you still seeing huge surge in homeschoolers in the country?
Yes, and perhaps not surprisingly, based on our conversation. So last fall we saw literally a doubling of homeschooling numbers across Canada, across the United States, and in many countries around the world. This fall, we think the numbers are actually going to grow more. That's preliminary information. We don't have official
Obviously,
numbers
yeah.
from provinces just yet. We will in a month or so. But based on other indications, we think the numbers are actually going to increase again. And that's probably not surprising. Just to sort of follow on from Scott's points, online learning is certainly an option for institutions, both at the elementary, secondary, and post-secondary levels, but it's not ideal. It's not the best form of learning for full-time academics. And I think a lot of parents got to see that this past year. Got to see that didn't work so well. It's pretty hard to stick a kid in front of a monitor for 6 or 7 hours a day. And I don't think any parent wants to go through that again this year.
We're going to cut to commercial break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. We're wrapping up our back to school discussion. Lots going on as we head into the final days before school starts. Scott, you wanted to say something just before the commercial. Did you want to tie that up?
Sure. Just simply to add to Peter's point, I do think that online education is possible, which it was not 5 years ago. It is possible, but it is less effective the younger the child is.
Yes. Yeah, I would have to concur. I have children in a whole slew of age ranges, but I agree. I know of parents who had to send their youngest child to daycare just so that they could stay home and monitor for their elementary school children's their classrooms. I said, so you've basically become the teacher at home and you've had to now pay even more because you can't have a toddler running around while there's synchronous learning. And it's really kind of exposed a lot of problem with this. And again, it kind of brings it down as are we encouraging, if you will, a two-tier society? I'm all for school choice. So if this was a permanent long-time solution, pick your poison, pick your education, whatever you like, by all means. But are people being forced into this? Like, are they freely choosing online learning, or they're saying, you know what, I don't want this vaccine, I don't want rapid testing, I don't want to disclose that personal health information, therefore I'm just going to keep my kid at home. And we've seen there's been some detriments with the lack of socialization. There have been record rates of mental health issues with children. Scott, do you have a comment on that?
On the mental health rates?
Well,
Sure.
Basically the lack of, our parents' hands being forced here.
Absolutely. I mean, they're being scared into it by the media. They're being misinformed about the nature of about the threat and the cure for it. They're being misinformed about what's actually happening in the classroom, from what I understand, and the standards that are there. They're not really being given a choice. They're taking the least bad option often. They're not taking the best option. They're taking the least bad option. Not many people are getting what they want, is what I can say. And the fact that we're talking about mandates and lockdowns. And
well, the lockdown
masking,
particularly. If you're a working parent, I mean, can you roll the dice on a lockdown? Or are you going to make a decision now that you're going to say, this is what our year is going to look like because I can't roll the dice if I have to go to work?
We live in a country where the Charter of Rights and Freedoms have been set aside, and there is no exit plan, exit strategy to come out of that state. And so has education also been affected? Of course it has. Has the development of children been impeded in a way that might affect their entire life? Yes. Has it affected their health disproportionately? Yes. I mean, Stats Canada demonstrates that the number of children that have died from COVID traumas that have nothing to do with COVID, they demonstrate like that it's terrible for kids. It's just awful. So yeah, it's child abuse.
Peter, I hear, and then there was a recent article, I believe in the Globe and Mail, that explained this, that there are a lot of students who are deferring their first year acceptance into university and colleges. They just don't want to do this distance learning, and I don't blame them. They want that first year experience or living in residence where things are not going to be up in the air in terms of whether there'll be a lockdown, will they social distance, can they go to a social function? Is this the new thing now? Are we just going to have like a whole gap because a lot of students are just deferring?
Well, I think that's certainly the case for a lot of, especially first-year students, those that are, they've just finished their secondary education, they want to move on to post-secondary. Personally, my oldest son deferred 2 years, and my oldest daughter has just deferred her first year. She's instead going to travel. They don't want to do online school. They don't want to do the vaccine mandate. They don't want to do any of that stuff. And they do want if they're going to go to college, they want the full college experience. So if you're not going to offer classes, if you can't play sports, if you can't socialize, what's the point of paying full tuition for half the experience?
Yeah, I don't blame them. I loved my university experience. Final 30 seconds here. Seems like a strange question to ask, but I want your final thoughts, each of you. Scott, are we headed for another lockdown?
Absolutely. And I want to know why Canada is more restrictive than other countries when we experience the same vaccine. Is the air different here? It's like, what is it?
Peter, your final word, 10 seconds.
Well, we've got an election on the horizon. We need better leaders. There's no question about it. We've had mediocre leadership, federally and provincially across this country. We need better leaders. Okay,
well, there's your back to school information. We will keep abreast on all these policies as they develop. Thank you both for joining me today.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Vaccine mandates, masking, social distancing, I feel like we're a broken record these days, but like it or not, that's what's on the horizon with back to school. And sadly, it does sound like we're going to be headed into a lockdown at some point this fall or this winter. Bottom line, take care of your kids, and it is you, the parents, who are up to making those decisions for your children because you're best equipped for that. For Counterpoint, I'm Tanya Granick-Allen.